Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Great Reality Reset. This is your host, Dr. Deep State, and today we are going to talk about Deep State Jedi magic. And where do we begin? Let's begin with the Great Reset, COVID 19, and Klaus Schwab. So he's sort of famous, I think, at the moment, uh, if for nothing else, for coming up with the phrase the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, imagine, and reset our world. Hence the great reset that he proposes. And gosh, on all the slides I'm going to present today, I could go off on so many directions. Um, let's see here. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, imagine. So the window's open there, and we can all, I don't know, does he mean he, us, some people, we can reflect, reimagine, and reset. So, gosh, I don't know. It kind of gets me excited about reflecting. So he has this sort of the handbook. I guess he sort of handed it was handy because he had the handbook. So right when the crisis hit, he said, "Gosh, I kind of got a solution." In politics, specifically what we call public policy, we refer to this as the opportunity window. So when changes sort of happen, social, economic, especially political, they said there's a window. Oftentimes it happens through crises, and the window opens, and the old phrase, once that window opens, don't pull down the shade. There's an opportunity. This makes me reflect and reimagine. This kind of shows my age a bit, but when I was young, I'm talking the 1970s. Okay, so when I was young, usually it was in the afternoon. There were these commercials. They were like the infomercials of the day, and there'd be whatever product on, hot dogger or hamburger. There's probably something for kids. And at the end, the announcer would say, supplies are limited, so order before midnight tonight. And I kind of remember maybe the first time I heard that, maybe, but after even a kid, after you hear about it over and over and over every night, the same product, you're kind of thinking, wait a minute, our supply is really limited. Our order's really only available until midnight tonight. And so once you kind of get wise to something, you're kind of, you're a little bit, I don't think jaded or cynical, but, you're kind of going like, oh, that's just maybe what grown-ups sometimes say. When I was older and I was kind of at the higher levels of sales and marketing in New York City, this was sort of a Jedi move. Like some of the masters would kind of repeat, what you always want to be hitting emotionally is need, greed, and fear of loss. And you never really accomplished a Jedi sale without those three qualities being present. And I can't delve into that too much. But at one moment, you had to simultaneously be hitting those emotional buttons. After someone signed on the dotted line, they'd like after the fact to think that it was done for cognitive reasons. But the Jedi knew better. He knew that you were hitting simultaneously just the right amount of greed, just the right amount of need, and that fear of loss. Order before midnight tonight because supplies are limited. So some of us kind of catch on, and we kind of know that sometimes people are a little bit disingenuous, should we say, sneaky. Um, And when I think of this opportunity window, when you think back, post 9/11, it was pretty much the whole of us, with a handful of exceptions, that said, oh, well, this is a crisis, so this is as Rob Emmanuel would say, you just never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what do I mean by that, Rom? What do I mean by that? It's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. In post 9/11 world, when they said, hey, we just happen to have this Patriot Act right here, or we just happen to have this project for a new American century, or we just happen to mass produce these body scanners, this would be a great opportunity to install them. We just happen to have the blueprint for a Department of Homeland Security just waiting here. And so you get the idea. And in retrospect, when we look back at those events with sort of eyes open, we can clearly see that it's order before midnight tonight. Supplies are limited. We see that event a little bit more. We see that a little bit more discerningly. Now, look at what Rom says here. You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. At face value, I believe people could simply read that two different ways. And it's not too much different from looking at the painting or the drawing, and is that an old woman or a young woman? Some might, a person that wants to kind of go back and reinstall traditional values could see, hey, the world's messed up right now. What a great opportunity to get back to the basics, to reinstall the old principles, and to do it right this time. Or a progressive, conversely, could say, what a great opportunity to move things in a radically new direction. Some might look at Rom's quote and reimagine a lot of things, but like looking at the old woman or the young woman, some people might be able to see both parts of it and maybe just kind of call it out as an old canard. The fix is on. But we come to that with differing perspectives, as I will demonstrate how we all kind of have to come to a seeming opportunity window and how we approach that window. So let's move on to Klaus Schwab and his ascension to the world stage, the reset manual in hand. And we see him here at the podium. And before I go on, I want to sort of pause so you can actually look at this and take in whatever information you would like to. This could go in a lot of different directions. If you want to put some interpretations down in the comment section, that would be cool. Where I'm going to go with this is, in a sense, I don't want to make too big a deal of this, but I do think that the picture is a great set of talking points going on here about what's going on in the world today. And, I got my chaos sigil there. He's got his sigils going on, and the podium says X, Y, and Z. And somebody can read into that if they want to. What I'm going to suggest here is that what's stewing in the world right now, and I do mean the world, is this approaching or impending great reset with all that might entail. For many people, they haven't thought about it. It doesn't mean much. They, whatever the experts tell them, they're kind of walking in that direction or through that door or through the window. But also what seems to be going on is this idea of a great awakening. And that could be so many things. We could be awakening to the Great Reset, for better or worse. We could be awakening to human potential that's been locked away and so forth. But there's a talk out there of a great awakening versus, I think in most cases, versus a great reset. And for many, I believe that they see this as, order before midnight tonight, that if the great awakening doesn't happen soon enough, there could be no chance to going back. Supplies will be out, and that we will find ourselves in this great reset with no opportunity to go backwards. So I think this is the issue of the day. And I'm really using Klaus here in his spacesuit. I don't know what it is, as a talking point. Okay, and what I want to suggest here, maybe in a sense we could see the old woman and the young woman at the same time, but I'm even going to be a little bit more bold, because I think the view I have here is divergent from what I'm hearing out there. And the idea would be that they are in fact tied together at both the supernatural and the natural level, that they're intertwined, the Great Reset and the Great Awakening. And it's going to be tricky to get our heads around that. But that's what I want to work from right now. The idea that when we open up this window of opportunity and we see on the one hand the Great Awakening and on the other hand the Great Reset, I want our minds to focus on the possibility or the possible ways in which these two phenomenon might be, in fact, one and the same. So back to Klaus here at the podium. The idea that the Great Awakening and the Great Reset might unseemingly be connected. Is there some kind of Jedi magic going on here, or chaos magic, that might give us a window into seeing what's maybe brewing at a covert level in the world? So I've suggested that there are, within the casting of chaos magic, a couple interactive elements at play: discordia, absurdity, and conspiracy theory. Discordia, like cognitive dissonance, it's an ungrounding. It may, and it likely does, have a relationship with the ethereal realm. And I'll dive into that further as time goes on. Absurdity, the ridiculous, again, attached to a lack of grounding, a lack of reason, and within a context of a larger working conspiracy theories, again, reality itself being contentious. And these things are part and a necessary part of the brew of really the spell casting that needs to be taking place. And of course, we're looking at it at a grand level, and not necessarily one, but I'm pointing out how they're working themselves, the spell casting, interactively at different places with different people at different times. So let's get back to Klaus. I have here, an interactive here between, I suppose, discord and absurdity. Yeah, I played with the photograph a little bit to get the cone head effect. I could go so many directions here. I think Dr. Evil, what I put in there, has him saying right and his mouth moving, or right, or however he says it. Once I post it, it's probably going to be a still. And, there's suggestions of space and wacky. It's absurd, right? I think at face value, it's absurd. And I mean, like, okay, this guy is supposed to be an elite intellectual / academic. Why is he wearing the costume? In a sense, who really cares? But okay, there's a sense of absurdity about it, and maybe for no other reason, we could kind of think about that as being the reason he's wearing. I don't know if it's a space costume. I don't know what it is. I'm not much of a, sci-fi kind of person, so it might have been lost on me. At the end there, that's Appleby. If that reference is lost on you, he was part of the cult, I will suggest psyop, called Heaven's Gate, which here looks just ridiculously laughable, absurd, cheesy. What I think makes it a little bit more has a sense of discordia about the absurdity is when you actually dig in to the power moving elite, the Kabbalists. That's actually Heaven's Gate right there, is actually the Sephiroth and the working between gateways. So it's actually the religion of the super rich. It's the inversion of the Abrahamic promise of the Logos. This is the counter singularity. I will again work with that toward in a few minutes. Okay, so that's part of, I think, the ungrounding of this is the precise objective at hand is turned into the absurd, is turned into the laughable, with the gate with the big G and the stars going through it and all that. So I think that's kind of funny myself. At the natural or the supernatural level, how does the magician fool the world? Or I guess the question I'm asking, how does the magician reset reality? How does the magician fool the world in order to complete the great reality reset? One way the magician might do it is through conquering the power structures of the world. And Klaus seems to be pretty good at doing that. Wow, for an academic, he sure does seem to get the attention of a lot of people. And we seem to be pulling away from chaos magic here. Is there anything absurd? Or do we see levels of discourse or conspiracy going on here? Well, I'm going to suggest as you sort of probe into it, we can get into all kinds of conspiracy when any one person is shaking the hands of the power elite in a way that transcends ideology, in a way that transcends party politics. He's with members of one political party that are supposed to be taking us into one totalitarian direction, while yet he's shaking the hands of another leader that is supposed to be leading a great awakening. Does that make sense? Well, what I'm finding increasingly, some of the most advanced truthers that I'm aware of have suddenly fallen into the mindset, i.e. Egregore, of believing that one is different from another. One represents a great awakening, and one truly does represent a path to tyranny. So I want to suggest we think about how they could be two faces of the same thing, the Great Awakening and the Great Reset. What are we to make of it when royals, billionaires, and elite politicians all quite happily share the stage with Klaus? If we look out that window, are these billionaires, royals, and politicians all glancing in the same direction? What is it that they share in common? And to answer this question, well, there are probably several denominators, probably endless, but I want to focus on just one thing that this group shares. And I'm going to pull this from the resume of Professor Klaus Schwab. This is one section that he termed thought leadership. And he's talking about words like multi-stakeholder, public-private partnerships, social entrepreneurship, and so forth. What he's talking about here are code words for communitarianism. That's what the royals, the millionaires, and the elite politicians share. Out that window is a future that is communitarianism. And we could hear that word. For some, we may have never heard it before. For some, it might be looking at the old woman or the young woman. For others, we might come in with a perspective on that. And I do. I believe that what this is a fusion of the building of the great 20th century ideologies, communism and fascism, into one worldview, one social working, one political working for the second half of the 21st century and beyond. So that's communitarianism. I got this off the internet. Somebody suggested that communitarianism is a savior in times of COVID, opportunity window. It's the savior we've been waiting for. So that is very much, I will suggest, the building of this oligarchical project that include the royals, the billionaires, the elite politicians. It is this organization for the future called communitarianism. In the book, Seeing Through the Singularity, I suggested that all workings of body and mind and the subtlest forms of politics are working toward communitarianism, or it's called a third way between capitalism and communism. It's not exactly both. It's a synthesis of this. It draws government business partnerships from fascism and employs group decision-making from communism. Communitarianism will resemble a corporate state, i.e. fascism, in which political elites work under capitalist rules to continue generating wealth while the working class is controlled by communist model laws. So this synthesis, once you hear it put that way, it's the best of or the worst of those two worlds together that work for the billionaires, the political elite, and the royals. In other words, they get everything, and whatever breadcrumbs are available are for everybody else. It's both models. And that gets away from our thinking of course, the yin and the yang. And it's hard for a lot of people to think that something could be going on at a grand scale. Way back in the beginning of the 19th century, I'll suggest you have the origins of fascism and communism coming out of the commanding heights of the economy and the intellectual brokers well over 200 years ago. But I'm going to leave that aside. But I do want to address that is one common denominator. So when they look out the window, they're seeing a future that is communitarianism, a synthesis of fascism and communism. How does that relate with a great awakening? Well, let's think about this. Let's go back to our elements of discordia, absurdity, and conspiracy theory. Certainly, there is a lot of discord when one's kind of thinking about this motley crew of billionaires and royals and ethnicities from around the world. It should leave a little sense in a world that we've been given why things happen by accident, while all these different nation states have differing interests. Why would they come together around this one idea of communitarianism? If we step back, we might ask ourselves, how does this big Klaus Schwab love fest of oneness and communitarian vision square against a powder keg of tension between red and blue, battling conspiracy theories by the day, at the highest levels, exposures of both the blue and the red at the highest levels. Wouldn't this force some kind of cognitive dissonance, some sort of discordia, some sort of absurdity by anybody that's kind of actually thinking about what the Great Reset entails, what the lockdowns entail? Somebody quickly. Now, do we have people from the blue or red team telling us this? No, but yet we have people at the highest levels of truth that are seemingly blinded by this. Amazon, Walmart, you get the idea. It's been crushed. It's prepared. It's been smashed into ashes so that the phoenix might rise, so that reality might be reset. It's just a fact that you'd have to be blind not to observe, not only to observe, but to hold in mind as you're flying from one camp, the blue to the red, either way, that what's really at play, what's really new in the world right now at a household level is this externalization of our institutions down to the level of questioning the basic notion of democracy. It appears that people are accepting from the red and the blue team that these elections have been rigged, and they have been rigged for a very long time. The question really is, does one team know something the other team doesn't? Or should we step back and say, maybe this is part of a grander awakening? Maybe the reset is part of a grand awakening. So with that, I want to again explore and highlight the notion of the egregore. So in one sense, Klaus is the quintessential agent of the reset, but could we also think of Klaus as a quintessential agent of externalization? And that brings me to the concept of the egregore. And I want to brush here on Wikipedia's concept, and then I want to dig into it a little bit. It is an occulted concept that is being externalized. It has a relationship with non-distinct entities, angelic entities. So we're talking about a relationship between the natural and the ethereal. It's an ancient set of rituals, an ancient relationship that is now, in some sense, being externalized. My book, Seeing Through the Singularity, very much externalized the concept. In fact, if you look at Wikipedia's entry, the way they're working this definition are from sources that are completely extracted. It's very difficult to actually find any kind of treatise on the concept of egregore. But the reason I'm delving into this now, I want to, in some sense, marry the idea of externalization, or what we could call the Great Awakening, and the idea of a Great Reset. So we see here the idea that in contemporary speech, we have the idea of a psychic manifestation or thought form. So we're working with humans, sets of thought forms that have a relationship with the ethereal realm, or a symbiotic relationship. What I especially worked when I systematically developed it is from this groundwork, which is, again, an extraction of many sources going back to John Dee and Aleister Crowley and Levy and so forth. This is sort of a building of a beast of sorts. It's semiotic in the sense that you're building this egregore, but at the same time, the egregore, you could maybe use kind of the virus analogy, but the egregore itself, when you are connecting to it through this relationship, also has a relationship on the human being or the thought form. It, in a sense, is controlling a reality, or can shift the reality to the invoker or the person that's participating in that thought form. So in Hebrew, The idea is literally an angel, an angelic being over a city. The idea I proposed is through workings of thought form, with the development of empire or globalization, if you like, that these thought forms hook on to one another and are building toward one grand egregore that's associated with one grand empire, one grand thought form. So that's what I was doing in seeing through the singularity. What I want to introduce now is something that's unique to this definition. And what I am going to suggest is externalization, or what we could attach to the idea of a great awakening, is egregore formation. I can only tap into this because it takes a while to develop this concept. But by analogy, what I would like to suggest, in the Garden of Eden, when Eve is fully seduced, by and large, what she's being seduced by is the externalization or the promise of something that's been hidden. The forbidden fruit, suggests the serpent, is forbidden because you will become like a god. That fully seduced Eve. And this is the only way I can describe this right now and keep this simple. That phenomenon of the relationship between the serpent and the ethereal realm fully seduced her, had her enter into a new thought form, and that, through Adam, has been inherited to mankind. So even today, when we relate the idea of externalization, somehow having a relationship with the ethereal realm, that's where I'm going. We are seduced by these externalizations, but we are also entering an arrangement, a semiotic relationship with the ethereal realm. And I'd like to leave it there. But what I've just introduced is the idea, just a thread between the Great Reset and the Great Awakening, that both, although they're seemingly somewhat disparate and perhaps even opposite ideas, through the creation of egregores, or a relationship with the ethereal world, one giant thought form is being created that can include both a great awakening and a great reset. And by the way, when we use words like great, that's very memeish. And memes, again, just like release the Kraken, I guess is the phrase over the last 2 weeks. This is seducing us into a thought process. Once you engage in this thought process, it is sort of virus-like. It really affects your thinking. It really affects your reality. But what I'm going to suggest is it actually is affecting quote unquote reality altogether and in and of itself. So again, let's look out that window, the Great Reset window, and think about what we see. Well, we come from a space of, I think, a bit of absurdity, a bit of discord, a bit of conspiracy brewing together. Can we see an awakening? Can we see a great awakening out that window? What I'm going to suggest is that what we see in this opportunity window is a future of communitarianism that's been biologically imposed upon us for a very long time. I do see a mixture of a great reset and a great awakening happening through the egregore formation, and the overriding power of this thought form, of this egregore, I will call the singularity, specifically the technological singularity that will bring together all of these parts, all of the politics, all of the energies, all of the thoughts. And I wonder if Klaus wouldn't agree with that. What has Klaus been talking about? According to Klaus, the Great Reset will lead to a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological identities, i.e., a technological singularity. He made it quite clear that transhumanism is an integral part of the Great Reset, or the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what I believe the prophet Daniel refers to as the Fourth Kingdom. Quote, lead to a fusion of our physical, digital, biological identities, which in his book, he clarifies are the implantable microchips that can read your thoughts. He goes on to predict that this will provide an incentive for law enforcement. I like when you look out an opportunity window and you think about, because it's all an accident, right? On the one hand, there might be an incentive for law enforcement, not that this had been foreordained in any way, to implement something that might look similar to Minority Report pre-crime programs. Quote, as capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. So I think people have differing ideas about the merging of man and machine, but I'm pretty sure not many quote unquote global citizens really would desire to have every one of their thoughts assessed in living time. Schwab goes on to really get into what this will look like. Bear in mind, he shares these thoughts with the elites from all ideologies, all political parties, all religious persuasions, because in fact, this is what links them. The communitarian vision is a vision that is a religion. And the outcome would be human cyborgs. Some of us already feel that our smartphones have become extensions of ourselves. These implantable devices. So, you like your smartphone. This is just the next step. And he openly endorses something the media still claims is solely the domain of discussions of conspiracy theorists, i.e., implantable devices. Again, the fusion of our physical, digital, and biological entities is the transhumanist singularity. As the blue and red team are swirling about with ever more prolific and pronounced theories of conspiracy, Klaus is kind of putting it right on the table there. The endgame is implantable human devices in which your mind can be tracked and interpreted all the time. This is the technological singularity. This is the outcome of the chaos magic. This is the final egregore. It requires externalization. It requires a selective externalization in order to create a great awakening so that you engage semiotically with a entity that switches, seduces your notion of reality. And once that relationship is established, In fact, its potential to change reality itself becomes the endgame. The Great Awakening is, in fact, part of the deep state Jedi magic, that it's part of Egregore creation and the great reality reset. We are living at a time like no other time, a time of mass spellcasting and the loosening of spirits that wish to seduce us, that wish us to enter into thought forms. I encourage us to actively resist that seduction.